None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of kratomscience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachet, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. So, how did the art show go?
Oh, it went very well, dude. It went better than expected. I didn't set the bar very high. Like, I didn't know how much we were going to sell or not sell. Some of that stuff was really, expensive, and we're not in Columbus, Ohio. So I would have been stoked if we sold like 2 paintings, but they ended up selling like 30 or 40 paintings.
Wow.
And the other thing too is I forget that Don Wershafter, he's been in this area for decades, for years. And so I always think like, oh man, it'd be great if like 20 people showed up. I'd consider that a success. But there were hundreds of people there, dude. It was
nice.
Packed. It was fully packed. Yeah. So it was a real big success. It exceeded my expectations in a number of ways.
Is there anything like on the horizon?
Yes, the calendar is being developed. Pretty soon I'm going to get the calendar on the Cannabis Museum website. But I will say this, go to cannabismuseum.com, and midway down through the page, you'll see a Friends of the Cannabis Museum where you drop in your email and then your name. And that'll at least get you on the email list of the first people that will know about all the events. And I'm in charge of the email list, so I can promise you that there are absolutely no spam headed your way. It'll be only like related to when events and things are happening.
This is a study that was published in Nutrients, the journal, October 14th, 2022. This is from a team that was mostly at Wailalek, if I'm hopefully pronouncing that right, Wailalek University in Thailand. And I noticed a couple of the people were affiliated with something called Center of Excellence in Marijuana, Hemp, and Kratom, but I assume that's excellence. It might have been lost in translation there.
Yeah, Center of Excellence, yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually interesting that there's a marijuana, hemp, and kratom department now at this university in Thailand. And I've never seen that or heard of it before. I tried to look it up. It's probably due to the fact that marijuana, hemp, and kratom are now legal in Thailand. Okay, so the title of the paper is... Hold on, I'm just going to play the pronunciations before I announce it.
Glucosidase.
Glucosidase. Glucosidase? Was that it? Let me see.
Glucosidase.
Glucosidase. Inhibition of alpha-glucosidase and pancreatic lipase properties, or is that lipase? Are we going to get through the pronunciation? Okay, the title of the paper is Inhibition of alpha-glucosidase and pancreatic lipase properties of mitragynine speciosa kratom leaves. And like I said, it's a team from the Thai University. And I'll just say their little summary of what they do in the study. In the study, phytochemical analysis of mitragynine, 7-hydroxymitragynine, quercetin, and rutin were performed in kratom extracts. The effects of alpha-glucosidase and pancreatic lipase activities were investigated in kratom extracts and mitragynine. So they're basically breaking down everything that's in the kratom leaves, and they're doing a kinetic studies, like it looks like petri dish stuff where they test it against the substrate, and they're also comparing it to 2 medications, one for diabetes and one for the lipids, be like a cholesterol medication.
Broadly, this is a study that's looking at the potential role of kratom and its constituents to have a treatment role or a treatment potential in obesity-related diseases, namely like diabetes, where your blood sugar is all out of whack and your lipid profiles can be out of whack, aside from diabetes as well, there are a number of, health conditions related to obesity. And so it was interesting, as this is one of the first articles that I think we've come across. And I think they mentioned it as well. Like, there's only been one other study in this sort of, from this perspective, in this arena, looking at the ability of the constituents within kratom to have a positive effect on the blood sugar and lipid profile abnormalities related to diabetes.
It said there were a couple other studies, and it's also, kratom's been used traditionally as a traditional medicine for diabetes and cholesterol. So this is starting to look at down to the compound level, what it's doing and how it's actually working. The definition of some of these terms: alpha-glucosidase is a glucosidase located in the brush border, the small intestine. It breaks down starch and disaccharides to glucose into small, simple, and absorbable carbohydrates. Got a link from Science Direct. It yields glucose. All plants contain glucosidase as an endocellular enzyme, and it resides in germinated and non-germinated cereals. So from what I got from it, it basically breaks down carbohydrates into glucose. So a lot of the medications for diabetes, acarbose is the one they test in here. Acarbose. It's an inhibitor of this glucosidase. They treat diabetes with alpha-glucosidase inhibitors, or AGIs. Lipase is a pancreatic enzyme that catalyzes the breakdown of fats into fatty acids and glycerol or other alcohols. 25% of people with diabetes have elevated lipase. And they're also looking at the flavanols like quercetin. I know we did a whole paper on quercetin, and it's found in a variety of fruits and vegetables: kale, grains, capers, red onions. Kratom has an unusually high amount of it. And then rutin is the glycoside combining the flavanol quercetin and the disaccharide rutinose. It is a citrus flavonoid found in a wide variety of plants, including citrus. So I'm just kind of defining the terms that we're going to look at. Mm-hmm. The next thing it says is, compared with the anti-diabetic agent or medication acarbose, mitragynine showed the most potent glucosidase inhibition with less potent activity of pancreatic lipase inhibition. So it actually is more potent than this commonly used diabetes glucosidase inhibitor, acarbose. Mm-hmm. Analysis of glucosidase pancreatic lipase kinetics revealed that mitragynine inhibited non-competitive and competitive effects respectively. Combining mitragynine with acarbose resulted in a synergistic interaction with the glucosidase inhibition. These results have established the potential of mitragynine from kratom as a herbal supplement for the treatment and prevention of diabetes mellitus. Going crazy with the pronunciation.
I don't think that's a very a special type of diabetes. Did you look into that?
No, that's type 2 diabetes. Like, I have that, and I have very mild type 2 diabetes that I control with metformin. It's just a long word for diabetes. Diabetes mellitus. Uh-huh. So there's type 1 and type 2 of diabetes mellitus. The lipase inhibitor they used was orlistat, that competes with dietary lipid molecules for enzymatic active sites. It's prescribed for obese patients. But it says, however, long-term use of these drugs is often reported to cause some severe side effects. Efforts have been directed toward discovering medicines from natural products due to their low cost, relative safety, probability of high compliance, and low instances of undesirable side effects. It also says, this is for all from the introduction. Natural products are known to be remarkable sources for discovering possible therapeutic approaches for metabolic disorders, such as anti-diabetic and anti-obesity drugs. Hence, extensive experiments were made to investigate the effects of molecules from natural products through enzyme inhibition assay. So this is what they're looking at now. It's kind of a continuation, it seems, in the introduction, in a field of study on plants, plant medicine, and dietary supplements from plants. And the interesting thing, they're talking about the phenolics, alkaloids, terpenoids, flavonoids, glycosides have shown potent pancreatic lipase and glucosidase inhibitory activities. And it mentions after that M. speciosa or kratom contains a diverse group of secondary metabolites. So that was my question. Like, if plants that have all these diverse metabolites, does that suggest that maybe it helps human metabolism to consume these plants?
Yeah, so the diversity of the metabolites within different plant compounds and how they help with like aiding in digestion and metabolism in humans. Yeah, I mean, certainly, especially ones that are involved in like enzymatic degradation, breaking down of proteins and into their sugars or complex sugars. I mean, with glucosidase, what we're talking about there is like basically breaking down from polysaccharides to monosaccharides or sugars during metabolism. And so, if there are compounds that are found in naturally occurring plants that either inhibit or, have synergistic relationship where they're not inhibiting, but they're helping promote the activity of these compounds, then presumably it would help with those metabolic processes, certainly.
It kind of reminded me of, people take stuff for like gut health that increase the biodiversity of your bacteria going on in your gut because they themselves are active and interactive with a lot of other things. Yeah, and it did list, it says previous studies have reported that kratom leaves exhibit activity that control diabetes and lipid profile, and it lists 6 of them, and I think most of them, I looked at I looked at those, I think most of them are cholesterol, and like you said, there's only a couple other ones that really studied diabetes other than, like, I think there was some that took groups of kratom users and like probably measured their blood sugar, their A1C or something like that, just to see if they, had any higher or lower with the control group. But then there's only been a couple that have actually looked at it from a chemistry standpoint, like this one. And so they used kratom from Thailand, from southern Thailand on the Malaysian Peninsula, the Malay Peninsula, it's actually called, which is southern Thailand and Malaysia, and that's where the kratom grows. And then, like, right south of that is the section of Indonesia where it grows. So they used the local Thai leaves. They prepared extracts, ethanol, methanol, and water. Ethanol was the one that seemed to extract the most stuff out of it. Alkaloids, the most flavonoids, the most everything. Ethanol seemed to work the best, followed by methanol, and then water. They got very little of the stuff out of it to study, and that would be the total phenolic content, total flavonoid content, and total alkaloid content. And the kinetic study is kind of where they measured the glucosidase inhibition and the lipase inhibition. So do you know anything about how kinetic studies work?
It's very similar to probably what we're doing when we're studying the pharmacokinetics of drug action in the brain. If you're doing kinetic studies of protein-to-protein interaction, you're essentially trying to understand how, that two proteins interact with each other. And so if you have them in a petri dish or a controlled amount, a controlled concentration, and then you introduce the lipase or a protein or an enzyme that is going in there to break down, whatever is in your substrate, I'm pretty sure that what they're doing is just watching like how quickly the substrate of interest is being degraded. Do you know what I mean? So they're looking at a rate, the rate of the interaction, the protein-to-protein interaction, or the rate of enzymatic degradation of a particular protein on its substrate.
And it also looks like they're determining the IC50. What does that measure? It's like the potency of the actual drug when it works. The definition I got was the IC50 is a concentration of a drug or inhibitor needed to inhibit a biological process or response by 50%. Okay.
Right.
And it's
so it's like to take it back to psychopharm or maybe like human example. So when you're doing dose response curves, your LD50 is when that's the dose of the drug that you're looking at starts causing lethal doses in 50% of the time, or your effective dose, ED50, is that at these concentrations, 50% of respondents are now getting the effects they're presumably looking for. And so an IC50 has to do with inhibitory concentrations. So if you're measuring how potently a molecule or an enzyme can inhibit a specific biological or biochemical process, in our case, the degradation of these complex sugars, IC50 would be the point at which the inhibitor has reached 50% inhibition of the function at hand. You know what I mean? So at this dose, at this concentration, 50% of whatever is being inhibited has been inhibited.
And they used 4 concentrations of test inhibitors. So the test inhibitors were the mitragynine in 3 different extracts, ethanol, the methanol, and the water.
I think that is. So they had 3 different extracts from kratom plants, and they, I think, wisely included the fact that there was an ethanol based extraction, there was a water-based extraction, and then the third one was what type of extraction?
Methanol.
Do you remember? Methanol extraction. Yeah. And like you mentioned at the beginning, what it turned out was the alcohol extraction or the ethanol extraction exhibited the highest total content of the active compounds from the kratom leaf.
Yeah. They did the acarbose, which is the diabetes drug to measure the inhibition of the glucosidase enzyme. That's the one that's prescribed as a diabetes medication. Orlistat was the one that measured against the lipase inhibition. The results, they found that mitragynine was actually more potent. It had a lower IC50, so that would be more potent than the acarbose. It was less potent on the lipids. And then the strongest one was a combination of kratom extracts and acarbose against the diabetes. So I don't think they tested a combination against the lipids because the kratom was actually less effective than the standard medication on the lipids. So they're basically testing kratom against drugs that are prescribed for kratom, and it actually did better than the one. And I forgot to read our disclaimer. I was going to do an extra disclaimer this time to tell people that if you have diabetes, definitely go to the doctor. Don't just try to wing it with kratom. I don't think that would be a good idea, especially when you get into like diabetes. And then there's like a lot of studies that show cannabinoids shrink certain tumors, but you shouldn't just, like, if you have cancer, you shouldn't just stay home and smoke weed. I think when you get into serious stuff, you gotta go to the doctor and rely on prescription medication, because you never know what your next batch of kratom is going to be like. It might work one time, then it might not have enough alkaloid content the next time. Just wanted to put that in there. There's always a disclaimer at the top of the episode, but just an extra one. Tables 1 to 3 kind of just show how much content they got out of the various extracts. Figure 3 and Table 4 that shows mitragynine being a greater inhibitor of the glucosidase, but a weaker inhibitor than the lipase than orlistat. Okay, the results showed that the IC50 of kratom extracts combined with acarbose, the official diabetes medication, was lowered almost twofold compared with that of acarbose alone. Interestingly, the combination treatments with mitragynine at the concentrations of 200 and 300 micromolars decreased IC50 values compared to that with mixed kratom extracts. That is interesting. However, 100 micromolar of mitragynine showed less potency than that of kratom extracts. Okay, so the mitragynine alone was more potent than the mixed kratom extracts. However, 100 of mitragynine showed less potency than that of kratom extracts. So you have to have more mitragynine as compared to the extracted, probably because the other alkaloids are doing something to inhibit the mitragynine. Thus, the results indicated that mitragynine kratom is a major constituent for reducing blood glucose as well as improving the efficiency of acarbose, which is a reference standard for glucose-lowering drug. So mitragynine did pretty well, in other words, of lowering the blood sugar in this Petri dish test
Yeah, and the kinetic studies. And you could see, if you look at the best one, I think at least lays out what we were discussing here. So yeah, they did, of course, all of the analytical chemistry to verify the constituents of what their different extracts were. But if you look at figure 3, inhibitory effect of the kratom extracts and mitragynine against the glucosase, A and B. So the methanol extract, the 3 extracts, and you can see that the ethanol extract was the fastest and had the least amount of concentration required to inhibit those activities. And then on B really is where we see mitragynine versus the more traditional acarbose medication. And it looks like they follow the same degradation pattern overall in terms of like the slope to get down to 0% remaining activities. And it looks like that the mitragynine does that with a little bit less of the micromolar concentration. So it doesn't need to be as concentrated as the acarbose. They're very similar, though. That's for sure.
Would be interesting for that, because they even said, long-term use may lead to some severe side effects. I don't know, particularly for acarbose. Maybe that would be interesting to look up. Acarbose long-term side effects. But I mean, if like mitragynine causes less long-term side effects, then it would be better to either combine them or use mitragynine alone. And we keep seeing that, mitragynine alone has less quote-unquote abuse potential than, say, like 7-hydroxy or, definitely opioids. So the people developing drugs might be a little apprehensive to use a diabetes drug that's also acts as an opioid. But if they're showing that it's all in the just kratom as a whole that causes like dependency in that, and maybe mitragynine doesn't, or it's very little and very controllable, then it might be beneficial as a diabetes drug.
Yeah, and so were we going to go down to figure 5 at some point?
Yeah. I was just looking up that acarbose long-term side effects. Symptoms include rash, redness, swelling, rare liver damage issues, yellowing in the whites of your eyes or skin, stomach swelling, pain in the upper right portion of your stomach. Yeah, that's whatever. Everything has side effects. But if it's particularly common, some of these side effects would be unpleasant. Somebody would probably want to switch medications. Yeah, okay, so figure 5, let's see.
Yeah, so figure 5 is the IC50 values of alpha-glucosidase of a combinatorial kratom extract or mitragynine with the traditional treatment acarbose. And so you can see just the acarbose alone. I'm guessing what they're looking at is the molar concentrations and the IC50 values. So it looks like in order for the acarbose alone to reach IC50, you need it to be about 1,100 in terms of concentration. But then when you add the ethanol extract, the methanol extract, and the aqueous extract, it drops that, by definitely more than half. But if we're talking about 1,200 down to 400, it looks like it could achieve the IC50 at much lower concentration. So it seems like they have a very good synergistic effect.
And would the 3 plus E plus M plus AQ would just be kratom full alkaloid extracts, and then the second one would be just mitragynine at 100, 200, 300 micromolar.
Yeah, it looks like it was just mitragynine. And so ethanol extracts, they were talking about how they have the, phenolic content, total phenolic content, total flavonoid content, total alkaloid content. So it's like, going with a rosin or another, full bouquet of what the plant has to offer versus just the mitragynine on its own. So it looks like there's added value having that phenolic content there.
It's interesting how the acarbose with any of the extracts is lower than acarbose with mitragynine at 100. Lower as in, actually higher, more amount to reach the same potency than when you give them 200 of mitragynine, it just sinks down, and then looks like the best overall is like 300 of mitragynine is slightly lower than 200. but that mitragynine at 100 is almost the same, a little bit better than the carbos in potency. That's pretty funny. It's interesting. I wonder why that would work that way. I guess it's just not like mitragynine alone isn't enough at that level, but it has to be increased. Otherwise, kratom extracts. The only thing I just had in the discussion, it says our research suggests that kratom leaves, particularly mitragynine, have promising potential for use in therapeutic and protective applications in diabetic patients, several supplements, in conjunction with standard pharmacological approaches. So if a doctor might see this and say, that's something a doctor could try, like your blood sugar's still going high with this medication, why don't you try taking a couple of kratom capsules every day with your diabetes medication? I wonder if a doctor would try that, but like I said, you should tell your doctor first instead of rolling the dice. But if we get standardization of the supplement would have to come first, and it's funny how because it's funny how it acts in conjunction with a lot of other drugs, because it's like, well, you probably shouldn't combine it with fentanyl or alcohol, but it has potential to enhance effects of other pharmaceuticals that might have their own undesirable side effects. So you could take less of the other one if your doctor says, and along with the kratom. Yeah, and with my metformin, I don't know if it was the metformin or it was probably just what I ate that day, but I've gotten sick a couple times on kratom, and I'm wondering if I was taking it too close along with my metformin. Because it'll really pull, like, if I eat, like, 3 big pieces of pizza with all that bread and stuff, and the metformin will pull that shit right out of my body. So it makes me eat better, because then I won't get, like, sick while I'm on this stuff. It makes me eat less sugar, because it really punishes me if I have, like, an ice cream or something. I mean, not too bad, but I'm more likely to get sick from eating a lot of sweets or a lot of, like, white bread, carbohydrate type of thing. So it's actually, that's just how it works. And my A1C's normal now, but yeah, I'm wondering if I've ever taken them too close together, if they're actually just give me a double whammy, even though the mechanism of action's different. And I looked up this is on kratom.org, and I don't mind giving them a plug, but they're seem like a pretty decent website. And there was a doctor that wrote this article. It's like a drug interaction guide. This guy, Dr. Kevin Carlson, and I'll put the link up. But he talked about kratom with metformin. He said they have a different mechanism of action. Metformin isn't metabolized in the liver, but it should be kratom should be used with caution in people who have been diagnosed with diabetes. Effects in blood pressure and blood sugar levels are unpredictable. Some reports suggest that it lowers blood sugar. Others have found it can increase blood sugar, which is really weird. The direction of this effect depends on the dose, the strain being used, and the state of the user's metabolic health. I mean, we could see with the mitragynine dose, it didn't really work very well on the glucosidase inhibition at 100 units, but you had to increase it to 200, so that might kind of interact at a different level with different people who have different diets and different metabolisms. So I think you could consider it a risk, but it's been a year since I've been on the metformin, and I've never had that until recently, but it was a couple times. But
it does seem like, in some ways, this does seem like a viable approach in order to improve someone's response. Like if they're not responding to the typical drugs alone, that this would be a good approach to do that.
It could be like you could take the paper to your doctor and say, well, what do you think of this? And then there's in the paper, there's a lot of other papers that they could look at and, be like, look, there's a few studies that show that this actually lowers blood sugar. It was used in traditional medicine like that. What do you think? Let's do an experiment on my body, doc. I don't know who would go for that, but I mean, I think most of the doctors, like I've even talked to a couple doctors that, said, well, I can't prescribe Kratom, but I can say if somebody who's doing it, they're fine and their blood levels look good and everything, I can say, all right, keep doing it, but, with all the cautionary caveats on there. But we're not suggesting you do anything. I'm suggesting you try get a medical professional's seriously, because diabetes is nothing to mess with. Neither is cancer or anything else. It's just one of those things that might be an option for somebody who can talk to their doctor about it. But I just think everybody, every time I'm on Reddit, I just want to tell so many people, just go get your blood checked. There was recently a guy that was like, I take 40 grams a day, my blood's fine, my kidneys are fine. And then you see people reply oh yeah, that's great. I was worried that I was taking too much.
Sorry if I'm just repeating what I just said, but even the authors of this paper are saying very much that this is that not a lot has been done in this. Everybody's looking at the use of the Kratom extracts in pain management and pain control, but it could have a role in obesity. But there, even within this article, the authors are not suggesting that people immediately go out and start supplementing, their diabetes treatment with Kratom. But it does seem to be worth investigating a little bit further, I guess, that's what they're suggesting.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully we see more with this, because a lot's been focused on the opioid activity, and not a lot's been focused on the others. And I like I said, I think with mitragynine, they're showing that it's even that deuterated mitragynine. There's two companies that deuterated the alkaloids. The one did it with mitragynine, and the one did it with 7-hydroxy. The mitragynine, they are doing human clinical trials, because once they add that deuterium molecule, they can patent it as a drug. So this one company, Cures Inc., they're doing they've been doing human clinical trials, and it's showing that there's low abuse potential. There's no published science on any of it yet so far. I mean, this is just from press releases, so none of it's published yet because it's undergoing patent approval. It's showing that even with this deuterium molecule, I think they've just announced in a press release, so there's nothing but they said that it's showing low abuse potential, just like the folks at University of Florida are showing low abuse potential with mitragynine alone, as long as there's not a high level of 7-hydroxy. It just looks like, as a cholesterol lowering thing, as a diabetes, blood sugar lowering thing, as well as the opioid pain reliever, the mitragynine alone at least might be a potential for doing some good things in the future. I'll have to edit.
An interesting article overall.
Definitely, and I think we've probably done a couple from that university. Lilac. That's how it's spelled. But I tried to look up the pronunciation of that, but I couldn't find that one. But I'd like to pronounce things great, but I pronounce Kratom, so I'm all right. Nobody in Thailand's looking at me for proper pronunciation of anything. But.
Yeah, I can only do the best. It's the best we could ask. Also, I started a Cannabis Museum subreddit.
Yeah, what's the Reddit?
Reddit.com/Cannabis Museum.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Dr. John Cachet. Check him out on social media at jcachet, CannabisMuseum.com, and the Cannabis Museum subreddit. Check us out at Kratom Science on Twitter, Facebook.com/Kratom Science. Please like, subscribe, share, rate, review. The music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is Moon Runner. Kratom Science Journal Club is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.